Welcome to Obertauern. It's cold. It's a cold place. We're about 100 miles south of Salzburg in Austria, and Obertauern is the place where the Beatles filmed snow scenes for their 1965 film Help, and they spent 7 days here in March of that year doing just that. This magnificent memorial was put up in 2015 to celebrate 50 years since their visit.
At 2:18 p.m. on Saturday, March the 13th, 1965, the Beatles, together with their wives and girlfriends and a 75-strong film crew, landed at Salzburg Airport in Austria. They were greeted by a 4,000-strong crowd, not all of whom were welcoming. After disembarking, they were whisked away to the beautiful city centre and to a hotel called the Österreichischer Hof, where they would give their one and only press conference during their stay. On a recent visit to the city, I discovered that although the hotel was still there, it had now become the Hotel Sacher Salzburg, a sister hotel to its namesake in Vienna, where John and Yoko had eaten chocolate cake in a bag at another press conference on March the 31st, 1969. The chocolate cake in question is an Austrian classic called Sachertorte, a rich chocolate cake which is named after the hotel. The room where the press conference in Salzburg took place backed onto the river Salzach, where a sizable group of fans had gathered along its bank. Looking up at that room today, the windows have clearly been replaced, but it's a reminder that this was as close as Austrian fans would ever get to the Beatles in their country. It had originally been put out that the Beatles were going to Kitzbühel, but they weren't going there. They just put it round they were going there. Their destination was in fact 100 miles south, to a small alpine resort called Obertauern. Obertauern had been chosen mainly for the fact that lying between 1,630 and 2,526 metres above sea level, it still had copious amounts of snow at this late point in the skiing season. Although it had been a popular destination for local skiers since the 1920s, Obertauern didn't become the official name of the village until 1962, and in 1965 was a long way from the fully developed tourist resort it is today. Although the Beatles had escaped their fans, they faced the possibility of another more serious danger in the mountains. At that time of year, with temperatures rising on the steep slopes, the threat of avalanches is very real, and between 90 to 110 people die in the Alps every year in them. In fact, tragedy had struck just a few days before the Beatles arrived, when an avalanche had swept a busload of vacationers into a ravine, killing half of them. As it turned out, the hot spring sunshine caused 2 more avalanches within full view of the film unit during shooting. However, the only avalanche which the Beatles themselves experienced was on the steps of their hotel, when a 2-foot deep slab of packed snow slipped gently off the roof and landed right at their feet. The hotel which had been chosen to host the Beatles was the Hotel Edelweiss. Back in 1965, the hotel was, unsurprisingly, much smaller than it is today. It was extensively renovated in the early 2000s, but still retains the rooms where the Beatles stayed, and you can even stay in those very same rooms today. So, we did. The Beatles' rooms were, and are, all located on the same corridor on the second floor. and bear the names of their famous past occupants. Ringo stayed here in room 219. John was next door in 218. Paul was 2 doors down in 216. And George got the slightly larger 214 at the end of the corridor. But which one had they put us in? Well, we were in room 216, Paul's room. So, let's go inside and take a look. It's a small, well-appointed double room of around 24 square meters and decorated, as you would expect, in the Alpine style. There's even a cool photo of Paul on the wall. Although the fixtures and fittings may have changed over the past 60 years, the view from the balcony window is pretty much the same. And very nice it is too. The Beatles loom large throughout the hotel, and there are posters, photos and memorabilia everywhere. You can even buy a book about the Beatles in Obertauern from the vending machine for €20. Also, next to reception, there's a signed copy of the menu from March the 14th, 1965, their first day at the hotel. For lunch, they had cream of asparagus soup, followed by paprika chicken with knockeln, which are like small shapeless dumplings, and green salad, followed by a dessert of mixed ice cream. For dinner, they enjoyed a starter of Italian soup, which was followed by chicken liver ragu in a ring of rice and a garnished cold plate. For dessert, there was Swiss roll with a kind of wine-flavoured custard. Although the restaurant has been redecorated and extended, I think I found the corner in which this picture was taken. It's at a table right at the far end of the restaurant below a window, and would have been the most private table in the room. So we know what the Beatles ate on their first day. What about the filming? Using a copy of the script, which came with the 2007 deluxe DVD set, you can see that the sequences in the finished film were quite different to the ones laid down in the script. The first 2 pages consist of a scene which ended up on the cutting room floor. In the film, the first thing to appear on the screen in this section is a caption which reads, "Meanwhile, seemingly safe in the sheltering Alps," which of course is followed by the Ticket to Ride sequence. However, after that, the script calls for a flashback sequence, which we've sort of recreated. Next up is scene 78A, which takes place at the front of the hotel.
So here we are outside the Hotel Edelweiss, and as you can see there's a memorial that's been erected here to celebrate that occasion. This memorial was put up in 2015 to celebrate 50 years since the Beatles stayed here. And a plaque as well. It's about -12 outside here at the moment. It's jolly cold. And here are the lads. Here they are. Yeah, I'm not sure what you think of the likenesses, but Paul, whose room we were in last night, and George, who was next door. Now, the first scene that was filmed on that first day that we're here was a scene which wasn't used in the final film. And it was a scene where they hired the toboggan on which they went down the slopes in the first scene. And that was actually here. This is the hotel's ski and ski service and equipment rental place outside the front. And as you would expect, the hotel and a lot of the buildings in the area have changed quite a lot in the past 60 years. And there are some stills which exist of the crew setting up the scene here and the Beatles sitting on a toboggan about down here. And there was a pile of snow just on that corner, so this is where the hotel would have ended. But as I say, the scene wasn't used in the final film. It was cut and the action moved on to the slopes.
And that deleted scene contained the Beatles' only scripted dialogue in the entire Austrian sequence. Now, I'm no mimic, but I thought it'd be fun to read out how that scene would have played out. So I'll read it now from the script. Come on then, if we're going sledging. No, but Paul, wouldn't you say I'd contributed a deal to the group, like, with me being an enigma, like? Insecure. Did you get some insurance? I got a lot of quotes. How much should he lose a hand? Uh-oh. Oh no, you don't get it, Ring. It's for us, should you miss a gig, or us be minus a member come the crunch. Go on, Paul, you get the sledge. But you don't need to worry now. We're free. Not a fiendish Easterner in sight. Your ring is safe, and you're lovely. Then they all fall onto the toboggan, and down the slope they go. Although John had been on skis before, his proficiency was nowhere near the level required for filming, so the task of doubling the Beatles in the skiing action scenes were played by 4 local young instructors. They were Hans Pretscherer, Franz Bogensperger, Herbert Lurzer, whose family now run the Edelweiss Hotel, and Gerhard Krings. Also, as they were dressed in the same costumes as the Beatles, fans confused them for the real thing, and they even ended up giving Beatles autographs themselves. One of the best-known sequences in the film is the curling scene. Now surely that location would be easy to find.
Well, here I am standing in the middle of a piste. Hopefully I'm not going to get knocked over, but I'm standing in the approximate location that the curling scenes were done. Unfortunately, in the background, the mountains have disappeared, but I've been lining up the peaks at the back. I'm guessing this is about the location which it all happened. Beautiful landscape down there, as you can see, and a perfect day for skiing. But I'm perhaps the only person in Obertauern at this particular point who cannot ski. Never mind. Looks like everybody else is having a great time. But as you can see, there's no curling going on today.
So in reality, there's no way of finding the true location of that scene today. Not only has there been massive development of this area behind the hotel with bars, restaurants and houses, but the slopes are different too. In fact, the only things which haven't changed are the mountains. Although the Beatles were happy to answer questions in Salzburg, journalists were kept well away from the Beatles in Obertauern. The only interviews they gave while they were there were on the telephone, to Brian Matthew for Saturday Club and to Chris Denning for Radio Luxembourg. The rest of the crew were housed a few hundred yards away down the road at the Marietta Hotel, which also still stands in the same location today. In fact, it was from the Marietta that the Bösendorfer grand piano used in the Ticket to Ride sequence was borrowed. However, once back at the hotel after its stay in the snow, the wood of the piano had become so warped it became unplayable. Also, the fact that John had been sitting in it hadn't helped either. Paul was the only Beatle who travelled to Obertauern without a female companion. But of course, it didn't stay that way for long. 22-year-old Gloria, aka Gigi Mackh, was the daughter of the owner of the Marietta Hotel and was tasked by her parents to help with translation between the English and Austrian crews during filming. She was also the current Miss Austria and a water skiing champion, so you can't really blame Paul for being keen on her. There's a copy of a signed photo in the Edelweiss with a dedication in Ringo's hand to the Mackh daughters. It was also at the Marietta that the Beatles gave their only live performance in Austria. That happened on the occasion of the birthday of the assistant director Clive Reed in the She Stall Bar at the Marietta Hotel. The group employed to play that night were Jackie and his Strangers, who the Beatles had once met in Hamburg, and it was quite an event by all accounts. As the night wore on, the party became louder and louder. In fact, it became so loud that the hotel guests complained, but the bar was so full, the manager couldn't even get to the stage and basically lost control of the whole situation. And at around midnight, the group were joined on stage by John and Paul to play some numbers. According to Herbert Lutzer, they played for 2 hours until 2 in the morning, breaking some strings and other instruments along the way. It was the Beatles' first and last concert in Austria. The Austrian sequence ends in scenes showing the Beatles skiing down the slope at night with their ski poles alight, after which they ski into a train station ticket office. However, between them skiing down the slope and into the ticket office, the script details another scene which was filmed but didn't make the final cut. In the scene, Ringo skis through a restaurant and grabs a flaming shish kebab from a waiter who's left holding a ski pole. The night scene of them skiing into the railway station, which was of course done by their doubles, was not shot in Obertauern, but 20 minutes down into the valley in a small town called Radstadt. We went there too to find out what the Beatles got up to in the town, and firstly, if the station building was still standing.
Whereas the building is still the same. As you can see, the writing on the side of the station has gone.
The short scene in the Ticket to Ride sequence, where they played on top of and in front of a moving train, was also shot in Radstadt. The Beatles also stayed overnight in Radstadt at a small hotel which still exists today. It's located here in the town square, and it's called the Hotel Post. This picture was taken in that hotel, and the size of those beers were probably responsible for the state of their signatures in the hotel guest book. This must be the only known example of John signing his name John McCartney. The hotel says they all shared the same room 6 in fact, which must have been a riot. The hotel states that the Beatles were here on 2 occasions, once on the 19th of March and again on the 22nd. The night before they flew home. Christmas is still a magical time here in Austria. Whether it's in the touristy Christmas market in Salzburg or the smaller local one in Obertauern, it really is a wonderful Christmas time.